Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with my colleague, Mike Ozanian, Assistant Managing Editor on the sports team. Mike, welcome. We're talking about the world's most valuable sports empires. What's the difference? Let's just distinguish, first of all, franchise versus empire. Because I think a lot of times people would think, well, Manchester United, these are the companies that can have multiple franchises, right?
To make this list, Diane, you have to be a person or a company that owns a majority stake in at least one team, plus your investments in other sports properties have to be at least $100 million.
Wow.
So you have to have your hands kind of in a lot of different things.
And so talk about why that criteria before we get into who's number one. Why does that, so empire basically means you have to not just have made your mark in one area. We want to see that you're a player across. Can you be in the same sport, or you have to be in different sports as well?
Well, you can only be an owner in one sport.
Right.
But what really got our fascination in this is the last several years we've seen these owners really spread out into different sports as they try to get scale and be able to use people in different areas with that same expertise, and also to be able to cross market. So if I have a building with two teams, I could sell advertising or marketing for both. I could get sponsorships for both. And really what's happened is, as owners have done this, because you got to remember, in these leagues, they themselves take investments in certain things like DraftKings and those types of analytical businesses.
So frenemies in a way.
Yeah, so they get some expertise, and then they're like, maybe I'll invest in this on my own, have my organization take a piece. So they've really built up this, because as the value of teams has increased, these teams have been making more money, and so the owners have been using some of that money to invest in sports-related assets.
And some do it well. I always think of sports as almost like buying a newspaper used to be, which is it can be a vanity project for people with a lot of money, or it can be, something that incredibly wise, astute entrepreneurs get into. What does excellence look like in terms of the list? Are these teams that tend to have the highest number of wins and losses? Who are the key people that, in terms of the talent that they often hire, that result in success? I mean, you can get lucky, but I doubt you can stay lucky on a list like this.
Yeah, wins and losses tends to matter more in small markets, right, where you don't have as many corporate sponsors. I mean, you look at something like MSG Sports, and unfortunately for me, as I'm a New York Knicks and New York Ranger fan, we haven't had a lot of championships there. Yeah. But they did a great renovation of Madison Square Garden several years ago. Great fan bases for both teams. So Jimmy Dolan, who runs MSG Sports, really doesn't have a lot of championships under his belt, but what he does have is a lot of revenue from high ticket prices, a lot of corporate sponsors, those types of things. And vanity play you mentioned, Dan, who doesn't want to own a marquee franchise in New York City?
Yeah, no, and so they're number one on the list, correct?
No, Liberty Media.
Liberty Media is number, okay. Yeah. Mea culpa. So that's the Atlanta Braves, Formula One. Drone Racing League, which I have to confess I did not know existed until I read this.
Yeah, that's a tiny, tiny portion of their...
That's just more of an experiment,
Of their $21 billion value. They control Formula One, which is the world's biggest motorsports racing circuit.
Yep.
Formula One has had a resurgence, great television ratings. Their next television deal is supposed to see a big increase. They also own the Atlanta Braves, won the World Championship a couple of years ago. So they've been managing those assets well.
Talk some more about, have you seen much in terms of the shifts on the list? Are we seeing emerging pockets of wealth? I mean, we obviously know the teams, the big name teams where money's made. Let's not take the drone league aside. Are there new areas where we're seeing investments going toward that we should keep an eye on?
Sports betting, as that becomes legalized throughout the country.
Right.
Analytics is huge. Data collection, because if you look at a company like Sport Radar, when public, a lot of their data is used related to sports betting. So there's a tie-in between the leagues, the teams, and the fans who love to engage and bet on sports. And as technology becomes more and more advanced, this betting is happening. Companies like Simplebet, they can bet on every play, so many different aspects of the game. What type of pitch is it going to be? Is it going to be a home run? Is it going to be a single? Is it going to be a strike? All that. That's an up and coming area. And also some of these empires sort of have VC funds they're setting up, like Harris Blitzer Sports, where they take their knowledge and expertise, they set up a fund, and they start to put money and invest alongside.
So it's like a corporate VC almost, where you're investing in startups you hope to acquire, or what, is that the model?
That's always one possibility, or you just ride the investment up. And maybe at some point you're looking at this and you're saying, hey, this is really going up in value. How could we apply what we're learning here to what our team is doing? So
you mentioned Jimmy Dolan. Who are some of the interesting personalities on the list? I would put him in that camp. Are there any that, strike you? Because you do have Jerry Jones, number 3, right? That is a person, and I'm sure an empire, but who would you point out?
Well, I think there are sort of 2 main categories here, 2 different strategies. One is somebody like Ted Leonsis at Monumental Sports. He really believes in keeping everything in the same geography. So here's a guy, he owns Washington's NBA team, the Wizards, its hockey team, the Capitals. He also fully owns the regional sports network down there.
Wow.
Recently bought the 66%.
Nobody looks askance. That's kind of local monopoly's okay in this industry,
yeah,
right?
It's a big geographic vertical that he believes in. Then you've sort of got the other template, which is a guy like Stan Kroenke, right? So he owns a hockey and basketball team in Colorado. He owns a football team in Los Angeles, and he also owns Arsenal, an English soccer team.
I know it well.
So he's a global guy. So that's sort of his template.
Since we've just come through the World Cup, I am curious about the sports and where the money's made in sports. Being a Canadian, I know hockey doesn't necessarily get the ratings, but it can be quite lucrative. Are some of these big sports, you mentioned the amount of wealth. How much has that wealth really increased? I mean, we hear a lot about the NFL, NBA. What about some of the other sports, especially soccer, hockey, et cetera?
The big bulk and where the increase is coming in, particularly in the United States, has been in media rights, television money. You sort of got to look at it this way. Where is the real value? Where's the intellectual property here? Well, it's at 2 ends, really. It's the players, which are controlled through the owners through collective bargaining agreements, and the owners. So while you see things like TV ratings, people cutting the cord and moving to streaming and things like that, the owners know they're still going to get paid because of the value of what they own. So it's really the content distributors that are still paying the big bucks that are taking smaller margins out of this deal. So by owning that IP right, it's the owners and players that are going to capitalize.
Now, does this represent the totality of the wealth of these people, or are you really only taking that chunk that's relevant to sports? Like you mentioned data analytics, so just sports. So there are people on this list who could have far more wealth because they've spread it, even further beyond sports, beyond betting, et cetera.
We're talking about Stan Kroenke, and he has a lot of real estate that's not related to sports. So we excluded that. This is strictly the sports business.
Any surprising drops? I know we've talked about some of the top ones on the list. Does anybody drop off the list?
We dropped a couple, but no fault to the people we dropped. We tweaked our criteria. So, for example, I mentioned that they had to have at least $100 million in investments outside. No. So, for instance, last year, the owner of the Bears were on the list, the McCaskey family, but they don't own any other sports asset besides the Bears. So they were knocked off this year, and there were a couple of others like that.
That's a country, not an empire, right? We got to distinguish between.
But we had a new player too. We had actually a non-typical owner. We had an institutional investor. Redbird Capital Partners joined the list. They were a small player, if you will, last year because they owned 10% of Fenway Sports Group, which is one of the mainstays of our list. Red Sox, Liverpool, but Redbird recently bought AC Milan. They control that
now. Do they manage differently? Because when I hear something like that, you start to think like private equity and other industries, and it's never, you don't always greet them with the same open arms necessarily as you do some of the big personalities. Is that,
Well,
am I
absolutely.
being
Dan.
stereotyped
I
here?
would say with the Redbird, run by Jerry Cardinal, they're strictly looking at return on investment. I would say none, or maybe
Sports
very
fans,
tiny vanity
maybe.
play there versus some of these other owners.
Which could result in moving up the list, right?
I would expect
Financial-
them to, absolutely.
Anything else you'd want to say? Of course, we don't want to give everything away because people should check out the list. But what else struck you? You know, especially you look at this space broadly, and you know, was there any stories that emerged from this that are intriguing to you? Companies you want to look more at because they're adopting an interesting strategy?
Well, we are a business media company, so I would say that one of the interesting takeaway I had here was, look, you can play this as an investor. You can buy shares in the tracking stocks of Liberty Media and also MSG Sports, which, by the way, all went up over the past year while the stock market went down.
And of course, you can always bet, right?
I think
Worst
a lot of
case
our
scenario,
viewers do.
we don't recommend it, but you can always bet. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Thanks.